Jessica, I didn't just survive. I rose.
6 months ago, I had what looked like a normal life. House in the suburbs, wife named Jessica, 2 kids, Tyler, who's 14 and refuses to communicate, and Emma, who's 11 and builds science projects while telling me I'm being dramatic. I worked as a supervisor at Henderson Lumber Mill for 18 years, smelling like sawdust and earning enough to keep us afloat. Now I'm living in a storage unit at Safekeep Storage off Highway 12, sleeping on a cot that squeaks every time I move, eating dented cans of food I open with a spoon because I lost my can opener somewhere between employed and homeless. The spiral started on a Thursday in April. My gut was churning all morning with that specific anxiety that means your subconscious knows something you don't want to admit. I left work early and drove home to find my boss, Derek Thornton's black Cadillac, in my driveway. I walked upstairs and opened my bedroom door without knocking because it was my house, my bedroom, my marriage that was being destroyed. Derek was there with Jessica. When he saw me, he didn't look ashamed, just annoyed that I'd interrupted. He stood up, straightened his shirt, and said we could discuss this at the office Monday. Not sorry, not an explanation, just a business-like suggestion to handle adultery professionally. Jessica pulled the blanket around herself with this look of relief, like she'd been waiting for this moment. I asked how long it had been going on. She answered casually, like checking the weather, long enough that it didn't matter anymore. Then she told me I'd never been enough. Not enough money, not enough ambition, just not enough. She'd been pretending for years while auditioning for a better life with a richer leading man. Within a week, Derek made me disappear. I got a call Monday morning saying don't come to work. That budget cuts meant my position was eliminated. Budget cuts. The company had just landed 3 major contracts, and Derek had been bragging about profit margins, but suddenly, my 18 years of loyalty became expendable. Jessica hired a shark lawyer named Patricia Green who charged $500 an hour to erase fathers from their own lives. Judge Margaret Foster, who had a vacation home nobody could explain on a judge's salary, signed every paper Patricia put in front of her. The custody hearing turned into character assassination. They used one moment 3 weeks after I caught Jessica cheating, when I'd punched the garage door in frustration, as proof I was violent and unstable. Never mind 14 years of coaching Tyler's baseball teams and helping Emma build model rockets at 2 a.m. Judge Foster gave Jessica custody. I got supervised visits twice a month with a social worker taking notes on everything I said. Tyler wouldn't talk to me, just sat there looking at his phone. Emma asked technical questions about why the legal system could separate families based on lies, which was her way of saying she knew it was garbage. I slept in my truck behind Walmart, then cycled through friends' couches until their wives got tired of the depressed divorced guy on their furniture. Finally, I scraped together $89 doing odd jobs and rented storage unit 247 at Safekeep. The woman at the desk, whose name tag said Linda, asked if I needed climate control. I said yes, because I was planning on living in it, and she pretended not to hear that part. That's when I found the briefcase. Shoved in the back corner behind boxes labeled in Jessica's perfect handwriting was a brown leather briefcase with brass latches. A luggage tag had my full name, Jason Mitchell, written in handwriting I recognized immediately as my Uncle Henry's. Uncle Henry had been what people politely called eccentric, and what honest people called completely crazy in a harmless way. He showed up to Thanksgiving with conspiracy theory pamphlets about fluoride in tap water and government surveillance. He died 8 months ago alone in his house, and I'd felt sad in that distant way you feel about people you loved, but never understood. The briefcase was locked, but the key was taped to the bottom. Inside was $60,000 in cash, mostly hundreds and fifties, bundled with rubber bands. There was also a plane ticket to Boise, Idaho, and a handwritten note that said, "Jason, this is just travel money. The real fortune is waiting at this address. Don't trust anyone from Henderson's circle. Finish what your father started, Uncle Henry." I sat there holding $60,000 like it was a live grenade. It didn't solve everything, but it solved whether I'd have to sell plasma just to make rent on a storage unit without a bathroom. Carl, the night security guard who pretended not to see me living there, knocked and asked if I was okay. I told him I'd be gone for a while, maybe forever. He said good luck, and if I found treasure, remember who let me shower in the employee bathroom. Before this nightmare, I'd actually been somebody. Supervisor at Henderson Mill meant wearing a slightly cleaner shirt and pretending I knew what I was doing when machinery broke. I'd been there 18 years, long enough to have a permanent sawdust tan. My boss, Derek, ran the place like a small kingdom, with expensive charm bought at the expense of other people's problems. Derek was always too friendly with Jessica at company events, always too interested in how she was doing. I chalked it up to him being friendly, which is like calling a shark circling your boat friendly. I should have seen the red flags, but hindsight only shows up to tell you how stupid you were after you're completely screwed. Jessica texted me Tuesday night at 11 p.m. while I was trying to sleep on my squeaky cot. "You'll die broke and lonely." I almost typed back something about dignity, but deleted it. Engaging with Jessica was like arguing with a tornado, pointless and likely to make everything worse. Uncle Henry had been collecting evidence for decades, squirreling away money in small accounts, buying bonds under different names, hiding cash. Everything legal enough not to trigger reporting requirements, but spread out in a way that was either genius or severe paranoia. The $60,000 was more than travel money. It was a compass pointing towards something bigger. I took a red-eye flight to Boise on a discount airline that charged extra for breathing. The flight left at 11:30 p.m., and I spent 3 hours wedged between a snoring businessman and a college kid watching TikTok without headphones. I didn't sleep, just kept cycling through questions. What was Henry trying to tell me? What did my father start that needed finishing? Was I about to waste 60 grand chasing a dead man's fantasies? The address was in Garden Valley, about 90 minutes outside Boise, a town so small it made my hometown look like Manhattan. One main street, 2 churches, a gas station that sold live bait, and the kind of quiet that makes city people nervous. The mailbox said Mitchell in faded letters. The property was about 3 acres with a single-level ranch house from the 70s and a detached shed with newer locks than anything else, which immediately made it interesting. Before I could get out of the rental car, a woman emerged from the hardware store next door. She was maybe 60, built like someone who'd spent her life lifting heavy things, holding a coffee mug. "You must be Jason," she said as a statement of fact. "Henry said you'd show up eventually. I'm Donna. I run the hardware store. And yes, I know everything about everyone because that's what happens when you've lived somewhere 40 years and people need screws and gossip equally." Donna made tea stronger than coffee and told me about Henry with fond exasperation. "Your uncle used to come get parts at 3 a.m., banging on my door, swearing he needed a specific type of hinge right then. Man was brilliant and infuriating equally. Called you Jason Surprise in his notes, like you were an ingredient in a pie he'd been baking 30 years. She handed me a key to the shed. He said you'd know what to do with what's in there. Also said not to trust anyone who drives a black Cadillac, which seemed oddly specific, but that was Henry. The shed looked normal outside, but inside it was organized like a library, designed by someone with severe OCD and healthy paranoia. Filing cabinets labeled by year, boxes stacked and indexed, and in the back corner under a tarp, a trapdoor leading to a crawl space. I climbed down a ladder into a space about 6 feet tall and 10 feet square, lit by LED strips that still worked. It was full of boxes, papers, and an old tape recorder. The first thing I found was a photograph in bubble wrap. My father, David, standing next to a young Derek Thornton at the Henderson Mill workshop, both smiling and shaking hands. That photograph was the beginning of understanding. Derek and my father had known each other longer than I realized. Whatever destroyed my life hadn't started 6 months ago. It started decades earlier. Inside the crawl space, Henry had organized decades of evidence like a librarian specializing in other people's crimes. Filing cabinets lowered piece by piece, boxes labeled by year going back to 1987, each containing documents sorted and cross-referenced. Photographs in protective sleeves, receipts in chronological order, enough evidence to keep federal prosecutors busy for 5 years. The audio tapes were the cruelest part. Henry had labeled each one with dates and participants. I found a portable cassette player that still worked and started listening while sitting on the dirt floor of a crawl space in Idaho. The first tape made my stomach drop. Jessica's voice, younger but unmistakably hers, talking to someone I recognized as Derek. "We can't rush it," she said nervously. "He suspects nothing. We need more time. Jason is trusting, almost stupidly trusting. He believes what you tell him as long as you say it with confidence." Derek responded calmly, like discussing dinner reservations instead of conspiracy. "We'll wait. The pieces are in place. We just need patience. When the time comes, we'll move and Jason won't see it coming. He's dependable, exactly the kind of man who doesn't ask the right questions because he's too busy doing the right things." I had to pause the tape because my hands were shaking. This conversation happened years ago. Jessica hadn't just gotten involved with Derek recently. This was a long con. I'd been married to someone working against me the entire time, pretending to love me while setting up dominoes to knock my life into rubble. There were more tapes, each worse than the last, bank records showing payments to Jessica's maiden name going back 10 years. Small deposits at first, then larger amounts timed around school breaks and church events when Jessica claimed she'd made money doing freelance work. I'd never questioned my wife about having more money. The record showed payments started before we'd even gotten married, meaning Derek had been grooming her, paying her, setting her up as a plant in my life before I'd even proposed. There were maintenance orders for Henderson Mill that had been falsified, safety inspections signed off without being performed, equipment failures buried instead of addressed. My father's signature appeared on some documents, but they'd been altered. Someone had been sabotaging the mill's maintenance records for decades, creating a paper trail making it look like my father, who'd been safety supervisor before his accident, had been negligent, when really he'd been trying to fix covered-up problems. Henry had recorded conversations where local officials discussed keeping the machine running, apparently code for maintaining corruption benefiting everyone in power while screwing everyone else. One recording featured Mayor Harrison laughing with a county commissioner about environmental reports that had been lost. "Nobody reads the fine print anyway," Harrison said. "We approve the permits, they pay the fees. Everyone wins, except the people who don't matter." Judge Foster's name appeared in documents showing payments from a shell company traced back to Henderson Mill's parent corporation, listed as consulting fees, what corrupt people call bribes on tax forms. Henry had tracked the money through multiple accounts, creating flowcharts that looked like conspiracy maps, but were just accurate representations of how dirty money moves through small-town America. Henry left a note taped inside a filing cabinet on a sticky note. "Jason, if you're reading this, it means I was right, and also dead. Which is a real mixed bag emotionally. These people destroyed your father, and they'll destroy you too if you let them. The choice is yours. Run with the money and live with ghosts, or fight with the truth and sleep at night. Love, Uncle Henry. P.S. There's more money in account number 4,478 at Mountain West Credit Union. Password is your father's badge number. Use it wisely or foolishly. Just use it." I laughed, then cried, then laughed again because Henry had been helpful and cryptic and weirdly sweet even in death. He'd spent decades building this case while everyone thought he was just a paranoid old man handing out pamphlets about fluoride. He'd been right about everything. I took photographs of everything with my phone, uploaded them to cloud storage with a fake email, made copies of copies because paranoia seemed reasonable now. I packed the most important documents in my duffel bag and climbed back up, feeling like I downloaded an entire criminal conspiracy into my brain. Donna was waiting outside with more tea. Henry was crazy, but the good kind of crazy that actually cares about truth. Whatever you found, use it well. This town's got long memories and short patience for nonsense. Henry didn't just leave papers and evidence. He left me a choice, wrapped in a video recording on an old camcorder. I found it in a box labeled, "Watch this first, you stubborn idiot." Very on brand for Henry. I set up the camcorder, plugged it in because the battery was dead, and pressed play. Henry's face filled the screen. Wild gray hair, glasses held together with tape, wearing a cardigan that had seen better decades. "Jason," he started, coughing into his fist. "If you're watching this, I'm dead, and you found my treasure map, which is really just evidence of crimes. But treasure map sounds more adventurous. Life's about to give you two options, and neither is great. That's how life works when dealing with people who think morality is optional. Option 1, take the cash I left you, maybe the additional money in the accounts, and run. Change your name to something generic like Bob Johnson. Move to Florida or Arizona or wherever people disappear into golf courses and early bird specials. Buy a boat or food truck or whatever makes you happy and forget this ever happened." Henry adjusted his glasses and pointed at the camera like judging me through time and space. "If you take that option, you'll have enough money to live comfortably. You can start over, maybe find someone who won't betray you for a man in a nice suit. But here's the thing, Jason, and I want you to really hear this. You'll spend the rest of your life knowing you ran. You'll lie awake thinking about Tyler and Emma growing up believing lies about their father. You'll see yourself in mirrors and know you had power to fight back and chose comfort instead. That kind of regret is heavier than any amount of money can fix." Henry coughed again, taking a sip from a mug that said, "World's okayest uncle," a joke gift I'd given him years ago. Seeing him drink from that mug made it hurt in a way that felt too real. Option 2. You fight. You use everything I've collected. Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence I've spent 30 years gathering. And you burn these people down. You expose Derek, Jessica, the judge, the mayor, all of them. You show the world what they did to your father, to you, what they've been doing to this town for decades. It won't be easy. They have money, power, lawyers who specialize in making guilty people look innocent. You'll be threatened, harassed, maybe worse. You might lose more than you've already lost. But Jason, if you fight, you might actually win. And even if you don't win completely, you'll make them uncomfortable. You'll make them pay a price. And you'll be able to look your kids in the eye someday and tell them their father didn't run when it mattered. Henry smiled, that crooked smile that made him look mischievous. Either way, you'll have a good story. People love stories about men who either ran successfully or fought stupidly. Both make decent epitaphs. Choose well, Jason. Your father would be proud no matter what. But I think we both know which choice lets you sleep at night. Love you, kid. Don't let the bastards win. Oh, and there's one more account I didn't mention in the notes. Check Mountain West Credit Union, account 4478. Password is your dad's old badge number. That's the real fortune. Use it to fight or run, but for God's sake, use it. This is Henry signing off from beyond the grave like some paranoid ghost. Good luck. The video ended. I sat staring at the blank screen, feeling like I'd been given homework by a dead man who knew me better than I knew myself. I called Mountain West Credit Union, navigated 15 minutes of automated menus, and finally got a human who transferred me to their trust department after I gave them the account number and my father's badge number, 2847. A man named Richard explained that Henry had set up a trust in my name, containing mineral rights to property my father had refused to sell back in the 80s. My father had owned mineral rights to land near Henderson Mill that Derek and his partners had been trying to buy for decades because there were valuable deposits underneath. My father refused every offer, saying the land shouldn't be strip mined for profit. When he died in his accident at the mill, those rights went to my mother, who died 5 years later without knowing what she had. Henry had somehow gotten control of the rights, protected them through legal battles I'd never heard about, and now they were worth between $8 and $12 million, depending on market conditions. $8 to $12 million. The words didn't sound real. I'd been living in a storage unit eating canned beans, and the entire time there was a trust fund with my name on it, worth enough money to never worry about storage units again. But Henry had hidden it, protected it, made sure I couldn't access it until I'd seen the evidence, until I understood what was at stake. He'd spent decades building a case so thorough, it was basically a bomb waiting for someone to light the fuse. I could walk away, access that trust, liquidate those mineral rights, and disappear. Or I could use Henry's files to pull apart a machine made of corrupt people who thought they were untouchable. I thought about Tyler, who wouldn't talk to me during visits. I thought about Emma, who asked technical questions about unjust legal systems because that was her way of saying she believed I'd been wronged. I thought about my father David smiling in that photograph next to Derek before Derek became the kind of man who destroys families for profit. I thought about Henry dying alone, surrounded by evidence because he believed truth mattered more than comfort. I chose not to run. I chose to fight with the determination that comes from having nothing left to lose. Agent Maria Santos took one look at the files I brought back from Idaho and stopped pretending she'd seen nothing like this before. She sat in her tiny field office in Boise, eating donuts, flipping through Henry's documentation with focused intensity, occasionally saying, "Holy crap," under her breath. After 45 minutes, she looked up with powdered sugar on her lip and said, "Jason, your uncle was either the most paranoid genius I've ever encountered or completely insane, and happened to stumble onto an actual criminal conspiracy. Either way, this is enough to open a federal investigation. I'm going to need you to not leave town or do anything stupid while we build this case." The FBI doesn't move fast on gossip or hunches. They move on paper, documentation, evidence that can survive cross-examination. Luckily, Henry had provided enough paper to build a case that could survive a nuclear blast and multiple appeals. The investigation began with bureaucratic slowness that makes watching paint dry look exciting. Subpoenas drafted, reviewed, approved by judges who weren't corrupt, which was harder to find than you'd think. Bank records that needed freezing required warrants, which required probable cause, which required more paperwork than I thought existed. The whole thing moved like a glacier made of legal documents. slow and grinding, but ultimately unstoppable. I spent the next 6 months in a tiny Boise apartment Maria helped me find, paying rent with money from Henry's accounts while the investigation churned forward. The apartment was a studio that had probably been a storage closet in a previous life, with a kitchen consisting of a hot plate and mini fridge. I ate frozen meals from discount stores, met with federal prosecutors who had questions about everything Henry documented, and watched bad television while trying not to think about my kids growing up without me. The waiting was the hardest part. I'd handed over everything, and now I was just some guy in a crappy apartment hoping the machine of justice would actually work. Maria would call every few weeks with updates that were mostly, "We're making progress and don't talk to anyone about this." Then after months of silence, things started happening fast. The press smelled blood first. The local newspaper ran a story. Small town scandal. Lumber chief in crosshairs. Then regional news picked it up, then state news, and suddenly Derek Thornton and Mayor Harrison and Judge Foster were being discussed on evening broadcasts. Henderson Mill's main office got raided on a Tuesday morning in early spring. Maria called to say, "Turn on the news and enjoy the show." I watched on my tiny television as FBI agents in windbreakers carrying boxes out of the building where I'd worked 18 years. Employees stood around looking confused and scared, probably wondering if their jobs would disappear along with their boss's freedom. Derek was arrested at the country club during Thursday breakfast with investors. The footage made evening news. Derek in handcuffs being walked out past people in polo shirts who looked scandalized that federal agents would interrupt their Belgian waffles with something as gauche as a public arrest. I watched that clip about 15 times, rewinding each time the handcuffs clicked shut. Mayor Harrison resigned rather than answer questions, issuing a statement through his lawyer about stepping down to focus on personal matters, which is what corrupt politicians say when they mean I'm guilty as heck, but hoping if I quit now, they'll go easier on me. Judge Foster got caught in recorded phone calls, accepting favors from Derek's shell companies, discussing cases before they came to her courtroom. She was suspended pending an ethics investigation everyone knew would end with disbarment and probably jail time. Hearing her voice on those tapes, so casual about destroying families for money, made me want to punch walls again. But I'd learned my lesson about expressing emotions through property damage. Jessica was arrested at school pickup, which is a horrible place for anyone to get handcuffed. I wasn't there, thank God, but I heard about it from 6 different people. She was charged with conspiracy, fraud, and other crimes carrying serious prison time. Prosecutors had evidence of her involvement going back years. The payments, recorded conversations, her active participation in the scheme to destroy my father's legacy. She called me from the booking room crying in that way people cry when they've finally realized consequences apply to them personally. "Jason," she sobbed, "they're taking my life away. They're saying I could go to prison for years. You have to help me. Tell them I didn't know what I was doing. Tell them Derek manipulated me." I held the phone away from my ear, taking a breath, trying to find words that were honest without being cruel. "Jessica," I said, keeping my voice level, "you helped plant the weeds in this garden. You watered them, helped them grow. Now you're surprised they've taken over everything. I'll handle the flowers with our kids. You deal with the weeds you created?" She started saying something else, but I hung up because I'd run out of sympathy for people who'd spent years destroying my life and only felt bad when caught. They called it the Henderson conspiracy. The charges stuck like superglue. Derek got 15 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, and 8 other charges. His lawyers tried arguing he was just a businessman making tough decisions in a competitive market, which is what rich lawyers say when they mean, "My client is guilty, but we're hoping the jury is stupid." The jury was not stupid. Mayor Harrison pleaded guilty to corruption charges in exchange for a reduced sentence, getting 8 years instead of the 20 he probably deserved. He had to forfeit his pension and pay back approximately $300,000 in bribes collected over the years. Judge Foster got disbarred and sentenced to 6 years in federal prison for accepting bribes and manipulating court proceedings. Every case she presided over for the last decade got reviewed, and dozens of decisions got overturned, creating chaos in the county court system, but giving people screwed by her corruption some measure of justice. My custody case was one of the first reviewed. A new judge named Sandra Martinez took about 15 minutes to look at the evidence and decide the original ruling had been based on fabricated concerns and biased testimony. Judge Martinez didn't smile too much and had a reputation for actually reading case files. Jessica did 3 years in minimum security, which seemed light considering her role, but apparently cooperating with prosecutors and showing remorse gets you discounts on prison time. When she got out, she moved to another state, got an office job under her maiden name, and sent child support payments on time. Calling the kids once a month for awkward conversations nobody enjoyed but everyone tolerated, because that's what fractured families do. The court gave me full custody of Tyler and Emma in a hearing that took about 20 minutes. Judge Martinez looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "Mr. Mitchell, I'm genuinely sorry for what happened to you. The system failed you spectacularly. While I can't undo the damage, I can make sure it doesn't continue." The first night I got Tyler and Emma back was awkward in the way all major life transitions are awkward. I'd rented a proper house using money from Henry's trust. Nothing fancy, but big enough that everyone had their own bedroom, and we had a kitchen with an actual oven instead of a hot plate. Tyler stood in the living room with his duffel bag looking around, arms crossed in that defensive posture he'd perfected, evaluating whether this place met his standards. He was almost 16 now, taller than me, carrying anger like a backpack full of rocks he refused to set down. Emma walked through doing a full inspection, checking closets and outlets, asking practical questions about internet speed and whether we were getting a dog, because statistically families with dogs report higher satisfaction levels. She'd grown her hair longer, lost the baby fat in her face, and developed the kind of sharp intelligence that was either going to make her a CEO or a supervillain. I made pancakes for dinner that first night because I couldn't think of anything else, and pancakes felt symbolic, like starting over from breakfast even though it was 7 p.m. I burned the first batch because I was nervous and forgot to adjust the heat. The smoke detector went off and I stood there waving a dish towel at the ceiling while cursing and apologizing simultaneously. Emma laughed, actually laughed, the first real laugh I'd heard from her in over a year. "Dad, you're still terrible at this." Tyler almost smiled, caught himself, but I saw it. That brief moment where his anger cracked just enough to let something else through. We ate slightly less burned pancakes at the kitchen table, sitting in mismatched chairs I'd bought from thrift stores. It was quiet at first. Uncomfortable silence where everyone's chewing sounds impossibly loud. Then Emma started talking about a rocket competition she wanted to enter, and Tyler mentioned football tryouts coming up in spring, and suddenly we were having an actual conversation instead of just existing in the same room pretending everything was fine. The nights got easier slowly, the way broken bones heal, gradual progress you only notice when you look back at where you started. Tyler's anger was like a fist that needed time to unclench. It took months of late-night talks and patient listening before he could articulate why he was so angry. He blamed me at first, which hurt but made sense because kids need someone to blame, and I was the safe target. Then he blamed Jessica, then Derek, then himself for not seeing what was happening. We worked through it together, sometimes with a therapist specializing in families recovering from trauma, sometimes just the two of us throwing a football in the backyard while not really talking about feelings, but somehow addressing them anyway. Emma wanted to know everything about the case, the investigation, the legal proceedings. She read news articles, asked questions that made me realize she understood more about corruption than most adults, and wrote a school paper about miscarriages of justice that her teacher called disturbingly well-researched for a 12-year-old. She processed her trauma through intellectual curiosity, and I supported it even when it meant explaining legal concepts I barely understood myself. I used the trust fund Henry left me handled by a lawyer who had the kind of moral outrage that made her volunteer for cases she believed in to start Mitchell Timber Company, a community mill that paid fair wages and actually followed safety regulations instead of treating them as suggestions. I hired old friends who'd been burned by Henderson. Carl came in for night shifts, finally getting paid properly for work he was actually doing instead of pretending not to notice people living in storage units. I still visit the storage unit sometimes, even though I don't need it anymore. I sit on that same squeaky cot and remember the beans, the cold, the moment I found Henry's briefcase and decided to follow a dead man's map towards something that might have been justice or revenge, but turned out to be both. I pay for the unit monthly, keeping it exactly as I left it, partly because memory needs a physical space sometimes, and partly because I never want to forget what it felt like to have nothing, so I can appreciate having something. Humor returned in little things that made life worth living again. Tyler started cracking dad jokes somehow worse than mine, which I took as a sign he was healing, because only people who feel safe make terrible puns. Emma insisted our rescue dog named Edison, because of course she'd name a dog after an inventor, wear a tiny construction helmet when he visited the mill, and I let her because why not? We're not rich the way Derek and his cronies measured wealth with multiple cars and vacation homes. We're rich in other things that matter more. Laughter at dinner tables, quiet Sunday mornings, the smell of pancakes that aren't burned most of the time, and the small, steady work of building an honest life brick by brick. Tyler got into college on a football scholarship and calls every week to complain about his roommate. Emma's building rockets that actually fly and talking about engineering programs at schools I can't pronounce. Henry's last joke was that truth would be worth more than his secret savings, and he was right in ways I'm still discovering. Truth doesn't always win, but when it does, it wins completely. I built a good life from the ruins of a bad one, which feels like the kind of ending Henry would have appreciated. Messy, imperfect, but fundamentally honest.